With Liquor Barn, you can shop your favorite bourbon, that perfect bottle of wine, or discover something new. To place an order for pickup or delivery, download the Liquor Barn app, visit liquorbarn.com, or call your nearest Liquor Barn location. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list for all the latest news on products, promotions, and events. Liquor Barn, where Kentuckians go to celebrate life. Cheers!
Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight is my good friend, live in the Bourbon Life Studios, my buddy, my pal with the short hair, Matt. How you doing, man?
Mark, I'm doing good. It is so good to be back in the Bourbon Life Studios. It feels like it's been forever. Has it been really that long?
I don't think so. We just did a Bourbon Life crew episode, right?
Crew last episode,
last week,
right?
Off the rails. That whole show just went off the rails, Matt. I mean, I don't know how
we were doomed from the beginning, but anyway,
I don't know how else to describe it. Yeah, you had just done the Ironman Chattanooga, so you were wiped out. But you know, we're back in. We got a great guest tonight. I'm really excited about this. This is the first time we've had him on the show, and I think people are just going to absolutely love this. Of course, we've had a few technical difficulties tonight getting everything set up, but hey, that's what the Bourbon Life Podcast is all about. Bourbon.
Our listeners don't need to know any about that, though, right? I mean, we could pull this one off and say it was a perfect show at this point.
It was a perfect show. That's right, Matt. And I'm not wearing headphones. So this is the first time I think I've done a podcast not wearing my headphones. So it's really weird. I'm like, I feel kind of like a fish out of water here, you know?
Well, let's get some liquid back in you. Hydrate the
Hey, that's a great idea, man. Here. That's a great idea. Of course, we do want to thank all of our sponsors. So thank you guys for all the support that you give us. We couldn't do the show without their support. So a big thank you to all of them. With that said, Matt, do you want to tell everybody who we have with us on this show tonight?
He is the whiskey brand ambassador for Heaven Hill and also known as the Whiskey Professor. Everyone out there listening, please be very warm, welcoming, and enjoy our conversation with Mr. Bernie Lubbers. Bernie, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, man. We appreciate it. Appreciate your patience with, like I said, with our little technical glitches going on early on, but we've not had you on the show before. It's long overdue. I'm excited to have you on here. Anybody that's in the bourbon industry, anybody that's a drinker of bourbon, anybody that knows anything about bourbon knows the name Bernie Lubbers. So Bernie, welcome to the show. We're really thrilled to have you on here.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me on. And just so everybody knows, the technical difficulties were not on my end.
No, that's right. In fact, Bernie was on early. He was there with bells on. It was all on the Bourbon Life side tonight.
That's exactly right. Bernie was even on. Yeah, he was on the session before we even joined Matt. So
that's right.
Kudos to him. But yes, all the glitches were on my end, man. So that is my fault. So Bernie, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you on here. Before we jump into everything, we drink a different expression during each round. So We've got something poured up for this first round. So, and these are choices that you made, Bernie. We kind of threw it to you and said, hey, what would you like to drink with us? What would you like to highlight? And these are 3 items that you picked. So you want to tell us what we're drinking in this first round?
Yeah, I picked these 3 because it's if I'm tasting 3 whiskeys, these are my favorite 3 to put together in a flight, and it will become more evident just why as we taste the second and the third one. But the first whiskey we're going to taste is a corn whiskey. It's Mellow Corn. It is, I think, one of the most significant and important whiskeys out on the market today. That's a big statement, for what it is. But it is. This bottle right here that stands out on a back bar or anywhere. It is this $15 to $20 bottle of straight corn whiskey, which is bottled in bond, and all three of the whiskeys we're tasting tonight are bottled in bond. It's another reason I picked them, because there are three different styles of American whiskey, and that's one thing that highlights Heaven Hill Distillery. We make every style of American whiskey. That's one of our goals. And 5 distinct recipes, and we have other experiments in the loop. But on a regular basis, we make these 5 different recipes. That's something that most, even smaller distillers don't even do, is that much like a large distiller. So corn whiskey is important, and these 3 whiskeys are all 4 years old, bottle and bond, 100 proof. So what a great way to taste 3 different styles. Sure. It'd be hard to taste a 3-year-old against a 5-year-old and an 80 proof against a 100 proof. But when they're all 4 years old and all 100 proof, it really brings alive what the differences is. Start with Mellow Corn, because it's aged by law, it's aged in a used charred barrel. All of our other straight whiskeys are aged in a brand new charred barrel. So it brings to life what a brand new charred barrel does versus a used charred barrel. And of course, most whiskeys of the world, single malts, blended scotches, blended Canadians, Japanese, Irish whiskeys are all aged in a used bourbon barrel.
Right.
So this brings to life what a used barrel does with almost the same recipe of the next whiskey we'll taste, but just keep that in mind. So this Mellow Corn is aged for 4 years in a once used Evan Williams barrel. It has basically the same laws as bourbon, so I don't know why anyone would possibly look down on corn whiskey, right? Even, no matter the cost. It has the same regulations. The only difference is the type of barrel that it's aged in. It has to be distilled at no more than 160 proof, just like bourbon. And it has to be from a minimum of 80% corn. So just the broad category of whiskey says grains. Bourbon says at least 51%. Corn whiskey says 80%. So it's as rigid a standard as bourbon. It has to be aged in a used charred barrel and entered at no more than 125 proof. All those are the same laws except for the type of barrel. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, and Bernie, I'll admit, I had no idea. I did not know that was the standard. I didn't know I didn't know it had almost the exact same requirements as bourbon does. But I didn't know that it was a used barrel. So that's a very interesting point. And you're saying, and this is all Evan Williams barrels. Is that right?
We got a lot of those. So if we're going to be dumping barrels, we're going to be using those. And some of them, and I always have, I try to carry with me everywhere I go. Of course, I'm home tonight, so it's a little easier. But I usually in my backpack, I always have the standards of identity. Yeah? Okay. And it's been the best thing to have with you at all times. So some people say, oh, no, it's got to be this. So actually, the definition of corn whiskey states that it has to be in a used barrel or a brand new uncharred barrel. We could use a brand new uncharred barrel.
Okay.
The barrels are so expensive today. We're going to do something with it,
right,
and get another hit out of it if we can. But the same science happens. So there is a science and a reason why it's a used barrel or a brand new uncharred barrel. It's not that we're trying to save money. It's the fact that there's science that happens when you age a corn distillate and age it in a brand new charred oak container. Over the first year or two, the corn flavor becomes neutral. And then you have the sweetness that remains of the corn and the barley, the spice of the rye, and the barrel notes of the vanilla, honey, and caramel start coming through and get expanded and augmented over the years. If you age a corn distillate in a brand new uncharred or a used charred barrel, no matter how long you age it for, the corn flavor remains, and thus you have corn whiskey.
Corn whiskey.
Because corn whiskey should taste like corn. We have bourbon whiskey. So if we wanted bourbon whiskey, we could take the same 80% corn, which is different than our Evan Williams recipe, which is 78% corn. This has to be minimum 80 because of the corn whiskey requirement of the TTB. And then it's got 8% rye instead of 10. So it's only 4% difference. So you really shouldn't be able to taste the difference in that small a percentage.
Okay.
But because of the barrel differences, you're going to get a light straw color instead of a deep amber color.
Right.
And you're going to have the corn flavor that remains. So this is corn whiskey. I know some people taste it and say, I don't like this bourbon. And I'm like, well, good. It's not bourbon.
Good for you.
It's supposed to taste like corn whiskey. So
Yeah, that's supposed to taste like corn whiskey. So I'm curious, Bernie, do you know, is there, how many other distilleries out there are actually making a corn whiskey?
well, Platte Valley makes one, but I don't think they have an aged one.
Okay.
Then I know 80 Laws out in Denver. They have a bottle and bond corn whiskey. The only other bottle and bond corn whiskey that I know other than Mellow Corn. And then Balcones out of Texas makes a True Blue. And I would call that a Texas corn whiskey because it's as dark as coffee if you've ever seen it, right?
I've not seen that, but
Well,
it makes
it's
sense.
as dark as coffee, and it's also in a used barrel, but it's in Texas. Their temperature is a little bit different. They don't have rick houses like we do.
Right.
And they put it in a smaller barrel. So it's picking up a lot deeper color, but still the same thing happens. So I would call Balcones Texas corn whiskey, and I would call what we do Kentucky corn whiskey, and I would call what Laws does, because they don't have rick houses like we have here. I would call that Colorado corn whiskey.
Sure.
And that's not a terroir thing. I'm just kind of, and I think that's it. I mean, there's 2,300 craft distillers, so I'm sure a lot of people are. But nationally, I think it's Balcones and us.
Okay. That's good to know. Because it's not something you see on the shelf regularly. I mean, you see Mellow Corn. Well, I mean, you don't see Mellow Corn as much anymore just because so many people go nuts about it. But but yeah, that's good to know. So Matt, what are you picking up on this one, man, in terms of the nose?
The nose on this has a real sweetness. I get definitely the corn and a lot of like frosted flakes, that like really nice, sweet, frosted, sugary nose on it. And I pick up a good bit of like mint from the rye is coming through with it. I get a lot of mint with this one as well. Just
It's
really
not burning. You said this is 80% corn, or is it 90% corn?
80% corn, 8% rye, and 12% malted barley. That's a good call there on Matt. That's a good kind of a descriptor. I've never really heard mint before, but I think because it's in a used barrel, you're not really getting the spice of the rye.
Yeah.
Right. So think of a barrel as a magnifier of flavors. So a brand new charred oak barrel is your strongest magnifier of flavors. And then a used barrel, think of it as like using the tea bag the second time. You're not getting as much flavor out of it, but you're getting different flavors. So I only get that spice, and it's very faint in the very end of and it's a longer finish. You'd think this would be a quick finish, but it's a longer finish than you would think. It's not really a super lush, long finish, but it's surprisingly a longer finish than you think. And I think mint's a good call. Now that you say it, I get it, but you really don't get the rye, even though there's 8% in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I mean, and you jumped ahead of us, Bernie. We're just still on the nose.
I can't put this so much up to my mouth and not drink it.
I know, it's like I'm drinking it, but I'm like, I'm gonna hold off and talk about the palate here in just a second. But Matt, I agree. You get that corn, you get that sweetness, and frosted flakes is a great descriptor just because sweetness, the corn flavor, the sweetness that comes through on the nose as well. Absolutely love it. And it is at least 4 years old, right, Bernie? So
this is 4 years old.
It is 4. Okay. All right. Gotcha. Yeah, that's great.
We're not Bernie, let's longer than that.
Let's talk about you. That's what our listeners want to hear about. Let's talk about how you got, let's talk about your past, what you've done. Cause you've done a lot of interesting stuff, Bernie. So we could probably sit here for an hour or two and just talk about that. But can you tell our listeners, if you would, just a little bit about yourself, your background, and then how you got into the world of whiskey and how you ended up over at Heaven Hill?
Yeah, I grew up in a beer family, but my mom and my dad worked at a brewery, Fall City Brewing Company here in Louisville, Kentucky. My grandfather was one of the founders of Fall City Brewing Company. So 13 German saloon keepers. My dad's from Oldenburg, Germany. My grandfather's from Oldenburg, Germany, up in the northwestern part near Holland. And in the 1890s, they came over to get away from the Kaiser because they thought he was going to go to war, and he did, but years later. And then he and 12 other German saloon keepers in Louisville, Kentucky in 1905 started Fall City Brewing Company.
Cool.
So my dad worked there for 45 years. He would have worked there 49 years, but he had to go to World War II and serve in World War II. So, so my dad also drank bourbon, and so did my mom. So they drank beer, but my dad, I don't always remember him drinking beer, but he would have a couple beers, and on the weekends, but he would switch to bourbon. And so bourbon was always around the house. Mom drank it too. She drank highballs, as they called them back then. So that's kind of just growing up around it. Then I made the mint julep every Derby. My mom and dad took customers to the Kentucky Derby, and my aunts came over and babysat us during the Kentucky Derby. And my job was to make the family mint julep. So we made it in a big mug, and I helped her make it. I wasn't there by myself making it, but put the sugar in and the mint leaves and muddled that. And then we put it in the refrigerator all day and let the ice melt on it, and it became simple syrup. I didn't know that, but it was just, I knew that's what you had to do. And then we put the bourbon in at the end. My aunt did, and she put tons of mint sprigs on top of it. And while the race was going on, everybody passed it around. No matter how old you were, everybody got a sip. And I remember just putting it up to the ice kind of hit my thing. I really didn't drink too much until I got a little older. But so it was always around. I went to University of Kentucky, graduated, worked at a bank for 2.5 years, and then did the normal progression into stand-up comedy. So in 1985, I hit the road and worked 160 cities in 20 years, from 1985 to 2005.
Wow.
I worked the Comedy Caravan in Louisville and all over. I worked the Comedy Off Broadway in Lexington. I did Crackers and that in Indianapolis, and Downtown Comedy Connection. I went all the way out to California and Hawaii, and even worked on Johnston Atoll on the way to Guam. Interesting. And then all the way over to Philadelphia and down to Florida for 20 years. I did that. So that gave me the skills. And I did a routine about my father, who drank a quart of bourbon a day. And that was my big closing bit. It was about a 10-minute bit about my dad who drank a quart of bourbon, lived to be 94 years old. He was pickled. He wasn't going anywhere, right? And so the cancer can't exist in a bourbon-ridden environment, is what I would say. And so it was a great routine. And so some folks in the bourbon industry took notice that I was talking to people about bourbon. And I said, hey, everybody grab a bourbon. Let's do a toast to my dad at the end of this. And then I had a song I wrote about my dad and the way he drank and everything. It was kind of a cute song. So we all did a toast. And so a guy, Jim Beam, said, hey, what would it take for you to have everybody order a Jim Beam at the end of the show? I said, well, there's only a couple bourbons in comedy clubs in 1995, right? So you probably had Jim Beam or Wild Turkey, Crown Royal, and Jack. I mean, you got to count those, right? So that's what was in a comedy club. So anyway, so I said, I don't know. So they sent me a bunch of shirts, and they invited me to lunch and tastings and stuff. So it was kind of cool. And then when they needed a job to have somebody do events and promotions in 2005, they asked me to interview for it, because I could stand up in front of people and talk, or I could talk to 2 people or 20 people or 200 people or 2,000 people. I think that helped me get the job. Plus I was, I needed health insurance, and I was like years on the road, and, self-employed for all that time. It looked like a good gig, but it was only a temporary gig. And then once I got into it and worked there, that's when Jerry Dalton, who is the master distiller at Jim Beam, and I got to work with Fred No every day over there too, which was really cool. But Jerry Dalton gave me these standards of identity. He said, son, if you don't know this, you don't know shit. So that's why I always carry them with me, because I don't know shit, right? But I have it down here. You can always know it if you have it with you. And over time, it just becomes a thing. So I started telling people how words on labels mean something, and what age statements meant, and what bottle and bond meant, and were different words. And back then in 2005, 2006, nobody was talking about that.
Right.
Actually they were saying that, older whiskeys were bad. Everybody, Booker No, even the great Booker No himself said anything over 9 years old was too old. Jimmy Russell still to this day says anything 10 years old or older is too old. And that was the mindset, and my dad's mindset. My dad, he said anything over 6 years was too old. He drank Heaven Hill 6-year-old 90 proof. I've got a bottle of it over here. You can see it right there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what he drank. That's what he drank a quart of every day. And he said, and I said, hey, Dad, why don't you drink Knob Creek or Elijah Craig? It's 12 years old. Why don't you drink? Come on, you earned it all your life. He said, son, I don't trust a bourbon over 6 years old. I'm like, well, what do you mean trust? He says, if it's over 6 years old, trust me, that's just the shit they can't sell. Yeah? So that was the mindset of the consumer, was anything 6, 9, pick a year. Everybody had their favorite. Anything over that was way too old.
Yeah.
So then, so it just taught me how to teach words on labels, things like that. And that kind of gave me a little reputation in 2006 when nobody was talking about that. And then then serendipity comes in, luck, right, comes in. Fred No's picture goes on the side of this Jim Beam bottle as the 7th generation distiller, and he's going to be on a worldwide tour talking about Jim Beam. And then they saw an increase in sales, slight increase in sales in Knob Creek in the small batch. So they hired me and 2 other fellows to be the first ambassadors, other than family members, at the world's largest bourbon company. I didn't think about that at the time. If I did, I would have been scared to death, and I was too dumb to be scared. So that's when got to be my first ambassador job in 2006. And I started teaching about words on labels and bottle and bond, even back then when nobody was talking about bottle and bond at all. And I was like, I noticed, as an entertainer, you got to find your hook, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easier to, that's why I had a great career in comedy, but I never, had my own TV show or did them like anything, because, you didn't just have that powerful hook, because it's hard when you're yourself. If it's selling yourself is tougher than selling something else and saying that something else is cool. And when I got in the bourbon business, it just clicked, and I went, bottle and bond's going to be your thing, right? And because Fred knows Fred No, he's in the Beam family. He's 7th generation. Jerry Dalton's a master distiller. Parker Beam, he's a Beam and a unbelievable face of Mount Rushmore of bourbon. I don't have that. So what do I have? And I'm like, I'm going to be the bottle and bond guy. That's going to be my thing, right? So I'm going to bring bottle and bond back, and then because Old Granddad was my first favorite bourbon.
Oh, okay.
And it had that orange label, and then it had bonded. And I said, hey, Dad, I found a great bourbon, Old Granddad. He goes, bonded. He goes, oh, bottle and bond. That's good stuff, son. And I went, wow. Here's a guy who says anything over 6 years old ain't good. And he was like, he stopped and said, that's the good stuff. Well, that stuck in my mind. That had to be something. So that's one reason why I chose bottle and bond. Plus, I just like those words bonded and the 100 and the tack strip that was over that was green all the time. So at that time, you got to create things and bring it to life. So I got a tattoo.
Man, see, we don't do video. I wish we did video so people could see this, Bernie. But that's a sweet.
And that just became my thing. And then I just made that part of every presentation and everything, and just kind of made it my shtick. Although I was passionate about it, I didn't just do it just to have a shtick. I was in love with it. And when I saw the laws and then saw that was still in the books, and even people said, well, that doesn't mean anything anymore. And I was like, well, why is it on the books?
Right.
Why is there a small little paragraph about what bourbon is? And why does the bottle and bond have a whole page of laws? You're telling me it doesn't exist? It's still there. So that's why I did it, and just kind of made it my thing. And then 2012, when Heaven Hill was needing an ambassador, they called me up. My buddy who was over at Jim Beam, he was working over. He had gone over to Heaven Hill, and he did that role as ambassador. And then an opportunity came up within the company. He's still with our company, and he's still doing awesome. But he had little kids at home, and it was hard for him to travel like an ambassador has to travel a lot.
Right.
So, so he says, hey, you need to call Bernie up. And then they called me up, and they lured me over. And it was hard. It was one of the hardest decisions in my life to leave Fred No and Sandy and Freddie and everybody over there. And, but you have to sometimes move on, and still friends with everybody over there. And I've been here for coming up on 10 years now.
Wow. That's awesome. So I'm just curious. Well, I'll tell you what, Matt, let's talk about, cause I'm looking at the timer here. We're about at the end of round 1. So let's talk about the palate and finish on this Mellow Corn real quick.
It's excellent. First and foremost, it
really is, Matt. And I'll be honest, I have never had Mellow Corn before.
It's a favorite.
Man, I'm just telling you, because I have seen it on Instagram and I've seen social media and people go nuts about it. There's like an entire, it's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show of
There's a
bourbons
whole
or
subreddit
whiskey.
on Mellow Corn.
What's that?
There's a whole subreddit on Mellow Corn on
Yeah,
Reddit.
that's what I'm going to say. I mean, there is a cult following of this brand. There is no question about it. So I can understand and see why, from the pricing, from the quality, from the taste. I mean, it's really good, Matt. I mean, I've never had it before, so this is quite a surprise to me, and I'm very pleasantly surprised by it.
Yeah, it's got all those frosted flake flavors come through again, and then it's just like those childhood memories of drinking the milk in the bowl afterwards, where you get that nice coating, like sugary, creamy coating all over the mouth and the tongue from drinking that cereal milk afterward. It's got that. I pick up that mint coming through again from the rye, and like you were saying, Bernie, there's a little bit of spice, just a little hint of like some peppercorn, just a little flavor coming down the very, very back end of it all, and just what a great whiskey. I love it.
And this is what, $15 to $20? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it is so underpriced, but it is, it's going to be. You can probably find it everywhere for about $16, and in some places it could be less. You can also buy it by the half gallon. There's a lot of places out I've seen it's in the big size, in the big boy size.
Yeah, Matt's shaking his head like I've been there, done that.
Yep.
And I think it was years ago way before I was at Heaven Hill. I think Paul Packalt called it kettle corn with a kick. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Paul's a great guy. We've had him on the show twice. He's one of our only multiple appearance guests, and we absolutely love Paul. He's great. He's great. So if Paul's a fan, there's no question about it that it's got to be great stuff, right?
And I always ask if there's any distillers out there listening, please make some aged corn whiskey. We can't have a category with only 2 whiskeys in it, right? So we need to have more on the shelf so it becomes more of a presence. So please, please, please make corn whiskey and age it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break. Let's get a final thought though, Matt. What are your final thoughts on a Mellow Corn? I already know. I don't even have to ask you what the final thoughts are.
It's great. It's a cult classic. It's like, why not? It's so overlooked, and I love it.
Yeah, I agree. First time I've had it, and I can see this being a standard, a regular on my rotation. Just something quick and easy to grab, and really enjoyable. So yeah, and drinking it straight at 100 proof. I mean, that's kind of a no brainer. I don't need ice. I don't need water. I don't need a mixer. Just pour it in a glass and enjoy it. So yeah, definitely enjoy it. Bernie, I tell you what, we'll take a quick break, get away from our sponsors. We'll come back. We'll pick up on that. And then we'll move on to our next drink as well. So everybody sit tight, and we'll be back with more with Bernie Lubbers, the whiskey brand ambassador with Heaven Hill, in just a minute.
Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they call Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com.
Spirits of French Lick crafts their spirits using only the finest agricultural product that has defined character, following their motto, respect the grain. They lead the way in representing the quality of the Hoosier artisan distilling process while paying tribute to its inseparable past. By implementing best practices from those early times, combined with modern touches, Spirits of French Lick has created a truly unique place in the industry. Spirits of French Lick products are distributed throughout Indiana, Kentucky, and Missouri, and can also be purchased online through Sealbox at sealbox.com. Visit spiritsofFrenchlick.com to learn more information, and make sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. All right, everybody, welcome back for round session period, whatever you want to call it, number 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark. With me, as always, is my good friend, live in the Bourbon Life Studios tonight, Matt. Matt, how you doing, man?
Mark, I'm doing so good. How about yourself?
Dude, I have been inducted into the Brotherhood of Mellow Corn whiskey. So I cannot complain. I'm excited as can be, man. Seriously, first time I've had Mellow Corn, which sounds crazy to say that, but I'm excited to be part of that brotherhood now.
You've seen the mellow light, yeah.
I have. Exactly right. It's the glow of the label, that yellow label. It's just that glow that draws me in. I'm thrilled to be part of that now. So Matt, we're having a great show, man. You want to tell everybody who we have with us?
That's right. He is the whiskey brand ambassador at Heaven Hill, and he's back for round number 2. Bernie Lubbers. Bernie, welcome back.
Good to be back after the Mellow Corn glow, basking in the glow.
That's right.
Basking in the afterglow of Mellow Corn. Wow. This is great. And thanks for hanging around, Bernie, and not leaving us during the.
Hey man, there's 2 more whiskeys to drink. I ain't leaving until that's
right. We got some more stuff to drink here.
A wise man.
Yeah, this is good stuff. It's funny because I was going to say earlier, we talked about 6-year-old whiskey and stuff. One of Matt's favorite whiskeys is the Heaven Hill 6-year-old bottled in bond, which unfortunately was discontinued. But that reminds him. Matt, tell Bernie what that is for you.
Oh, that's my grandmother's peanut butter pie through and through. Every little bit of it.
I missed it too. I did. I got a couple bottles in stock here. I don't drink other than doing podcasts or when I have friends over and drink. I do not drink at home. So this is my whiskey stays a long time around here. Although I am a drinker, I just can't do my job during the day and night and then come home and drink too.
Sure.
It's one of my favorites, that the 6-year-old 90, but that's just what happens in the whiskey world. We can't go back in a time machine and make more. And when things happen and you got to rob Peter to pay Paul. And as a friend of mine always says, you always want to be Paul in that transaction. Then tough decisions have to be made because unfortunately we are in the bourbon business, not the bourbon charity. So we can't just do things because
sure. I mean, it's crazy because that was a $12.99 bottle or, whatever. I mean, $15 bottle at the most for 6
don't have
years.
To advertise it. Didn't have it around. It's just sitting there in a similar bottle as every other bottle. We didn't have a proprietary bottle. That would be a lot more money with a lot of other distillers. But Heaven Hill, being that was our flagship brand from 1939. And then 1941, when it came out, the 6-year-old, the 4-year-old was the gold label bottle and bond, which became Evan Williams bottle and bond. And then you had the 6-year, and unfortunately, when you have brands like Elijah Craig growing at 35%, when you have the barrel proof, 6-year-old whiskey shares a recipe with other bourbons. And you have to look at your barrel inventory. And if you don't look at your barrel inventory, you've already failed in the bourbon business.
Sure. Yeah. And you got to look out 10 to 12, 15 years down the road, right? So, I mean,
no, we got to look 18. We have Elijah Craig 18. So we have to look 18 years in the future with that HH reg. See, our master distiller, you've had Connor O'Driscoll on. He makes, in his team, they make distillates. And the HH reg, which stands for HH regular, 78% corn, 12% malted barley, 10% rye, shares that recipe with Elijah Craig, Evan Williams, Fighting Cock, J.W. Dant, T.W. Samuels, J.T.S. Brown. And when you share with that many brands, if one of them, you can't just push them all. Somebody said, why don't you have 6-year-old bottle and bond all over the country? It was just in Kentucky. Well, if we did that, we'd be out of Henry McKenna tomorrow.
Right.
There's never be any more Henry McKenna ever because it shares a recipe with it too.
Right.
And what makes those brands taste different is the 60 plus rick houses we have. Is it on the first floor or is it on the 7th floor? Is it at Deatsville or is it at the brick rick houses down in Bernheim? Those all make brands.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The distillery only makes that distillate for those brands.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Deatsville, man, because people go nuts over Deatsville stuff.
It's a great property, but each property, we have 7 now.
Yeah.
Each have distinctive personalities. I kind of freak out over all of them. Yeah, Deatsville's cool because it has those steepled or tiered rick houses that look really cool. They have wings on the bottom, so more of the more of the tin touches more of the bottom floor, and then it gets progressively smaller up top. And when you open the windows at the bottom, keep all the windows in the middle floor closed, and open the windows at the top, you get this rush of airflow that goes up and has a hot air chimney effect that really is almost like a blow furnace on the barrels at top. I mean, that's kind of a little overstatement, but that's kind of a way to describe it. And then you get some really cool whiskeys. So I love every property as much as I love Deatsville, but I love the shape of those Deatsville rick houses more than any of them. But I tell you what, I'm really going nuts over too is some of those Bernheim brick rick houses that were overlooked for so many years because, a lot of the Parker, he didn't work with the brick houses that much, and he kind of stuck with what he was familiar with is what you should do. But Connor comes in with some he's worked at places that have brick houses. He was used to it, and now boy, we're looking at some really cool whiskeys coming out there. No knock to Parker whatsoever. As I said, he's on the Mount Rushmore of bourbon for me. But sometimes it's cool to have a fresh new set of eyes, and you see something laying there that's always been there that you walk. It's like Mellow Corn, it's been there your whole life. I always describe Mellow Corn like JTS Brown or JW Damp or, bottom shelf whiskeys, if you will. They're bricks of gold on the bottom shelf.
Yeah.
Everybody looks at the top shelf for gold dust. And you should always grab gold dust because it's not always there. So always grab gold dust, but don't forget to pick up the brick of gold that you stepped on to reach the gold dust and put that in your cart too.
Yeah.
Because the next thing you know, it could be gone, right? Just like the 6-year-old. And then you're like, hey, I'm sitting here complaining that it's gone. I guess I should have been buying it the whole time.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Cause especially like the JTS Brown, because I know people that are just absolutely crazy about the JTS Brown, and it's obviously super affordable, inexpensive. It's like the 6-year-old, the bottled and bond used to be $12.99 or so.
And a bottled and bond. So it's awesome.
And a bottled and bond, right.
They're the most restricted spirits in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a guy that I'm friends with on Instagram, Bill Bender, and Bill is like one of the biggest JTS Brown fans. He lives down in Florida. And he always asks people, he's like, hey, can you Kentucky people just ship me out some bottles of JTS Brown? So he gets a nice supply from people, but he's a huge fan of the JTS Brown, and I am too. I mean, for the pricing, you just can't beat it. Like you said, it's bottled and bond. It's a bottom shelfer. I mean, in the stores, but it tastes really good. I mean, you can't beat that for the price. But you mentioned the Evan Williams bottled and bond, so let's talk about that because that's what we got poured up next. So you want to tell everybody a little bit about that one?
Yes. So this is our HH Reg, which stands for Heaven Hill Regular. That's how we do not put brands on a barrel. So when we fill this barrel, it will say HH Reg. It will become Elijah Craig, Evan Williams 1783. It will become Fighting Cock, JTS Brown, and all that. But we do not put brands on the actual barrel.
Okay.
So all we know is it says HH Reg. Then we spread them all around the rick house. We do know that like we're going to need Elijah Craig 18 years from now. So those all live on the bottom floor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where those are all going to come from. We've learned that older whiskeys that are over 12 years old must be treated gingerly and aged very mellowly and almost like in a crock pot. And the way to get that to happen is to do it on the lower floors. We've learned that in our institutional knowledge over 87 years and dealing with older age whiskeys. And we've done it longer than just about anybody on a regular basis. Then we look at what we need. And we also have a sensory team. Tawny Gauthier, she's been with our company over 30 years. She's kind of our mad scientist. And she started on the bottling line, screwing caps on bottles and stuff. I mean, she just is known has a great palate, and now she's just an invaluable member of our team. She tastes 200 whiskeys before noon, and basically she does it by smell and by barely tasting. She knows whether that's on the way, that lot that she's tasting, which could represent 100 barrels. she goes, oh, that's going to be 1783. That's Evan Williams 1783. I get this note. No, that's going to be JTS Brown. That's going to be Evan Williams Bottle and Bond, and that's going to be Elijah Craig. Bang. She said she could never work for another distillery because she doesn't know what Eagle Rare tastes like. Right? So she's stuck with Heaven Hill forever. Right? And then their team of Mike, who's been with our company over 40 years, and Chris Briney for over 20. I mean, it's just amazing what they can do. And, we still feel we're a small family-owned company. We do things with a few people when other major companies have buildings of people. We have 2 or 3 people doing that job. Right. So, and it's just, I've worked at both. It's been great. So anyway, Evan Williams is 4-year-old HH Reg. It is aged for 4 years, bottle and bond. Bottle and bond means that also you just can't be 4-year-old barrels, because bottle and bond has to be whiskey you barreled in a 6-month period. That's how strict bottle and bond is. So we have to be careful of how we build that brand, because if we run out of barrels from January through June and we have orders by May, we can't just grab barrels from July to, it has to be from 1 6-month period. So there's a lot of barrel inventory control that goes into this.
So that's what they call the distilling season, right? So you got 2 distilling seasons, like January through June, and then July through December. Is that right? Yeah,
it's a spring season, and then the fall season is July through December. So there's only 2 distilling seasons. There's 4 seasons in the world in our nature, but there's only 2 in distilling.
Right. Those are the only 2 that really count. So,
but it's just, you have to manage your barrels. It just, when you deal with bottle and bond, like if regular Evan Williams Black Label, the number 2 selling bourbon in the world, if that number shoots up, where sales are up, an incredible amount, like they were during COVID, they went up 50%. Wow. You got to really watch your bottle and bond, because you have other whiskeys that share that recipe, and it's a lot of management, and there's a lot we have a lot of barrels. We have almost 2 million barrels, but as Max Shapiro says, our owner and president, it's just not enough, right? We sell a lot of whiskey too. We make a lot of whiskey, and fortunately we sell a lot of whiskey too.
Yeah, no doubt. So Matt, let's talk about the nose on this one. What do you pick up on this?
It's fun to see this one and see the influence of the new charred oak with it. I pick up a lot more wood sugar, a lot more toasted notes, a little more caramel, a little bit more vanilla, some of the toasty, oaky flavors in there as well coming through with it. And I also get like a little bit of cherry or a little bit of like a sweet fruit with it as on the nose as well. I think more of that is influenced from the barrel.
Gotcha. Matt, it's funny because I was talking about the Heaven Hill 6-year-old, and I had peanuts on my mind. So now I'm starting to get like a little bit of a nutty note off of this one on the nose. I don't know if you get that or not, but maybe it's just me just thinking through it. But I agree on the cherry, the sweetness, the fruit that comes through, the impact of the barrel being a charred oak versus a used barrel. And almost, it's not exactly the same mash bill, but daggone pretty close to what Mellow Corn really is as well. So it is interesting to get to see the difference in the profiles on these 2 different whiskeys. So yeah, I really enjoy the nose on this one very, very much. So Bernie, I kind of feel like in the first round, we talked about how you got into the industry, but we didn't really talk about what it means to do what you do. And I think that's important for people to understand. Can you kind of give us an explanation regarding what your role is and what you do on a regular basis? I saw somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, like that you travel like 150,000 miles a year. Is that right?
Oh, it could be in some years, but it's usually, it's a lot. I never really, okay. When you do Europe and things like that, it adds to the miles, but it before COVID, I traveled 2 to 3 weeks a month, sometimes 4. Yeah.
Okay.
2 to 5 days a week.
Wow.
Mostly around the United States. And then I've been to Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, 3 different times for Heaven Hill. Connor and his team make distillates. Our marketing department and our sensory team make brands from those distillates. And then on my team is Jack Choate. He is our Western whiskey educator. So he and I are on a team. If two people's a team, then we're a team. And in tennis, it's a team. So I'll go with it.
Yeah, sure. There you go.
And we're hoping to grow the team. We are the face of the brands in the marketplace. So we go into a market and do a market visit, and we'll talk to retail liquor store owners and managers. Thank them for their business. What can we do for you? We do staff trainings to those employees who talk to the folks who come into the aisles and look for information. And what can we do to help you educate about not just our brands, but the category, to help you with what you talk with our customers. Then we talk to bartenders and servers, people that recommend our brands and make drinks with our brands. And we do staff trainings and educations to give them as much information as we can about our brands. And also, we're realistic, as I think every distillery is. We know that just because I come there, you're not going to never serve anybody else's bourbon and only serve Heaven Hill. We know that you use different whiskeys for different drinks, and that's fine. How do our whiskeys work in your bar? How can we help you, educate you, and get you to know that if somebody drinks this, you can recommend that, right? So for an example, Blanton's, the explosion of Blanton's over the last few years has just been absolutely astronomical, right? It's the bottle that everybody wants. So when somebody comes into your bar and says, do you have Blanton's? Well, first of all, obviously they're on a corporate expense account, right? So, but you don't want, whether you're coming into a retail store or a bar, you don't want to tell that customer, I don't have that. Sorry. Right. And then be done. And then they order a Budweiser, and then you're off with it. Right. So what do you do? Well, you know what you might do? You might want to suggest some other single barrels that you can get. Right. So Weller, everybody wants Weller, and it's hard to get Weller. Well, there's only two other ones that you can get every day, and that's Maker's Mark or Larceny. So why don't you recommend one of those? I don't care if you bring up somebody else's brand, as long as we're in the conversation, I'm happy. Right. So because when it comes to weeded bourbons, there's only a couple that you can get every day, and I just mentioned the two of them, and so the rest of them it's hard to get. It's a very small little category of numbers of brands, although it's expanding. So that's just the kind of things that I can do to when somebody says I have $100 to spend for my uncle who loves bourbon, comes into a liquor store, $100 bottle. I'm looking for $100 bottle. Well, wouldn't it be great to be able to tell them, I don't have E.H. Taylor single barrel today.
Right.
And that would have been a perfect one for that. Would it be great? So you know what? Have you ever heard of Bottle and Bond? Bottle and Bonds are the most restricted bourbons and whiskeys in the world. There's over 2,300 distillers in the United States. That means if they all make two brands, there's almost 5,000 brands of American whiskey. There's only 50 bottled and bonds in the world. Those are the most exclusive. I call them the Green Beret or Navy SEAL of spirits. It's got all the medals. Would you like to look at some of those? Oh my God, yes. Well, why don't you buy here? Have a Mellow Corn, an Evan Williams, a Rittenhouse Rye, a Sacred Bond Bottle and Bond, and a JTS Brown and a JW Dant. Isn't 6 bottles a better gift than one for your $100?
Sure.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I try to tell people, to give them an idea how to sell. Not just, you don't need much help to sell Henry McKenna or Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, right? And Elijah Craig's just not selling itself, and it does pretty good. We want to sell everything. And I also want to, I want to help the whole category too, because, hell, Jack Daniel's outsells the entire bourbon and rye category combined. So, we got to work together to show them how it works. So if you like, so that's the kind of things that I do. And then also, it's really important to talk with our distributor sales partners, because we don't call on every bar and liquor store. Our distributor sales partners do. So I give the same different talk, but I tell them the words that I use to help sell. Evan Williams, to sell to a bar, is profit on the second pour. What'd you just say? Yeah, you can make a profit the second time you touch Evan Williams Bottle and Bond. wow, not many brands can say that, right? And now,
Yeah.
it's all about profit right now after coming out of these hard times. So, when you bring to light that I've got a Evan Williams bottled in bond that's $15 a bottle and one of the Green Beret of spirits, and the second time you touch that bottle, you're making a profit. That's a big deal. So that's important information for our sales folks. So that's what we do on an everyday basis. And then we do things like this and talk to podcasts, talk to journalists, talk to consumers, interface with them. It's a fun job. I get to greet VIPs when they come in and visit to Louisville and visit our distilleries from all over the country and the world.
Nice.
It's a lot of fun.
Hey, Matt, are we VIPs? Can we come in and visit Bernie?
Let me know.
So Matt, let's talk about the palate and the finish on this Evan Williams bottled in bond. What do you think?
It's got a lot of the really, really characteristic bourbon notes for me. It hits on the more of the caramel, more of the vanilla, to take a couple pages out of your book there, Mark.
Yeah, that's my descriptors, Matt.
Yeah.
Back it up, son.
Then I pick up like cornflakes coming with it.
Yeah,
There's not as much,
too, man.
not as much sweetness and
Right.
not as much of that frosted flake flavor that we got from the Mellow Corn. I think
Right.
with this one, the oak kind of in the new charred barrel tames that down a little bit, but it brings
Yeah.
out a little bit more of the rye on the back end
Yep.
too. I'm getting
Yep.
a little bit more spice, a little bit more peppercorn, a little bit more of some herbal notes with it as well. But just really well-rounded, a great drinker.
Yeah, I hate to sound like Denny Potter, but yeah, vanilla and caramel. That's what I'm picking up on this one. But yeah, the rye does come through more than the other one, Matt. But like you said too, the frosted flakes, yeah, corn flakes, the corn comes through. There is some sweetness to it, but it's not like you said. It's not. It's kind of tamed down a little bit from what the Mellow Corn was. But yeah, man, just an all around great drinker. And this bottle, Bernie. Again, what's pricing on this one is where
$15 for 750 or so, yeah. 15, $16, a little over $20 for a handle. I mean, it's become the house pour of many cocktail bars because of that 100 proof. The reason that cocktail bars like to use that 100 proof or 101 or 103 proof is but you also have to have a price that you can sell and make money at. And,
sure.
Say you have an $8 cocktail, $10 cocktail, you got to take everything into account. But if you make a Manhattan with a bourbon whiskey and one Manhattan with a rye whiskey, and by the way, all three of these spirits have the exact same 3 grains in them.
Right.
If I make a Manhattan with an 80 proof or a 90 proof bourbon and rye, you might not, because when you add the sweet vermouth and the ice, which becomes water, that base spirit might disappear in that cocktail. And it might taste good, but you might not be able to taste which one's the bourbon Manhattan and which one's the rye Manhattan. But if you do 100, the 100 proof pokes its head over those ingredients and really says, right. I'm the rye Manhattan and I'm the bourbon Manhattan. And that's why your cocktail bars like those. So it's at a good price. We know where it needs to be priced. The consumer loves it. I'm shocked that the consumer found it because we really didn't highlight that it was bottled in bond too much on the original label. Now it is, because people are now more educated of what bottled in bond is. And this is a juggernaut of a brand.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good one. I've got several bottles of this one already. So this is one I have had and have several bottles of, Bernie, just because I think there was concern it's going to disappear maybe.
No, we're good on this. And what's cool? You all both noticed it. So this is why I did there's almost the same 2 recipes, Mellow Corn. Right. And then Evan Williams, but it really brings to life what a used charred barrel and a brand new charred barrel does. So the same exact age, to the same whiskey,
right,
at the same proof. It's really incredible. So now, where you might not, on Mark, you hadn't had Mellow Corn before. So now, just a few minutes later, you can tell in your own words, in your own experience, what the difference between corn whiskey is and bourbon whiskey is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's good because I've been drinking for quite a while. So it's probably a good thing I know how to do that now. But that's really nice. Well, I'll tell you what, we are at the end of round 2 here. So Matt, final thoughts on the Evan Williams bottled in bond.
It's the new standby, I think, in light of the 6th year Rest in peace, my friend. Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. I see no reason that this can't be recommended to an experienced, a new cocktail, whatever drinker you might have. I think it's very versatile and a bourbon that stands on its own.
Yep. I would agree with that 100%, Matt. So well said. I can't add much to that. So, all right. Well, let's take a quick break. Get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more with Bernie Lubbers, the whiskey brand ambassador with Heaven Hill, in just a minute.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky.
All right, everybody. Welcome back for the third and final round, session, period, act, scene, whatever you want to call it, of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, live in the Bourbon Life studios tonight. With me is my good friend, my bourbon drinking buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing, man?
Mark, we are getting 2 rounds down here into our third round. I'm doing great because we are having what a great show. Drinking,
Is it? I mean, honestly, man,
it really is. I could sit here and try to put some like great, profound and prophetic title to it. We're just having a good time.
Yeah, but you're good at that, Matt. You're very loquacious. You're good with your words. So if you're kind of tongue tied, man, then I can't imagine what our listeners are experiencing right now, right?
I am the cunning linguist, but I guess I'm at a loss right now.
All right, man. Tell everybody who we have with us.
Back for round period session number 3 is Bernie Lubbers, and he is the whiskey brand ambassador at Heaven Hill. And we are so excited for round number 3 because we have, again, another one of my favorites poured up. So what do we have in our glasses right now, Bernie?
This is the most sought after rye whiskey in the world. This is Rittenhouse Rye, bottled in bond, 4-year-old 100 proof rye whiskey. It's a 51% rye. So it's more of a, it's from Pennsylvania is where the brand originated, but it's clearly we make it in Kentucky. We say it on the label, distilled and bottled by Heaven Hill Distillery. And I would call the Kentucky rye is mostly that 51% barely legal rye.
Barely legal rye.
Yeah. 35% corn. So we dial the corn down from the bourbon. We dial the rye way up. Same 3 grains. And then because there are more complex sugar or carbohydrates to break down into fermentable sugars, we dial the malted barley up to 14%.
Okay. Well, Matt, I was way off on my notes.
I know. I'm actually consulting your notes here now. I'm making some amendments to your notes. So.
Yeah, I don't know where I got these mash bills from, but I did pretty awful on these. I admit it. So thanks for clearing that up for us, Bernie.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
That's quite fine. We've thrown a lot of mash bills out because we make several different mash bills at our Evan Williams Bourbon Experience in downtown Louisville. So maybe some of those got crossed over. So
I got you. Yeah, could be. I'm not sure where you get online, you think you can trust the internet, but like Abe Lincoln said, you can't trust everything you read on the internet, right?
That's right. If you're ever in a doubt, we are one of the few distilleries that disclose almost everything on heavenhilldistillery.com. So nice. we tell everything about how we distill it, the temperatures, the proofs, the all 5 recipes of all of our recipes are on there, and the number 3 char barrels. We use all number 3 char barrels except for some of our Parkers and other experiments. So it's full disclosure on heavenhilldistillery.com.
Okay, that's great. So listeners can find out all the information they need to at that website, which is great. Matt, what do you pick up on this one? Let's jump right into it, man. What do you get on the nose?
It's definitely got a different nose from what we've had so far with the Mellow Corn and the Evan Williams. So
sure.
I was actually under the impression that this was a higher rye than 51% as well. So I'm glad that you cleared that up for us, Bernie. I always thought it was more of like an East Coast Pennsylvania rye, something in the 60s. So I was thinking along what you put down here on our cue sheet here, Mark. but the nose is definitely a break from what we've been drinking. It comes through the big punch of that grassy rye grain and spice. And I actually picked up like a really creamy marshmallowy nose with it as well, which I was a little bit surprised at. I think maybe some of the corn is playing some influence into it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I'm getting some of the corn coming through this, Matt. I mean, I get that rye spiciness somewhat, but the corn still comes through, and I'm picking that up on this as well.
Really nice, grassy, grainy, like all the really, really nice rye characteristics from like rye distillate. It's just got that like really bold, fresh aroma and nose to it with a lot of grain flavor.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. So, Bernie, let's talk. We had Connor on the show. I say it like we're like best friends. Connor, we were hanging out with Connor back on episode 53.
Yeah, name dropping like crazy over there.
Yeah. So, but anyway, we had Connor on the show. Connor O'Driscoll, master distiller there. I think it was episode 53. But we talked a little bit about the history back then, but that was quite a few. Actually, this is episode 121. So we are almost 70 episodes beyond that. So
Nice.
Can you share the history of the brand, the Heaven Hill Distillery itself? Talk a little bit or a lot about that, just so our listeners can understand that.
Sure. Well, you have to go back to Prohibition, and so you have 1920 to 1930, almost 1934. You can't you can't have a distillery. You can't produce, ship, sell, buy alcoholic spirits. Once Prohibition was over, December 5th, 1933, a lot of people who had the institutional knowledge of how to make whiskey, distillers that were out of business, and businessmen that were looking to get back into the distilling business, they've been out of work for 14 years. That's a long time. They didn't know this was ever going to end. Right? They started going around looking for seed money, if you will, and investors. Our family, the first generation investors of the Shapira family, there was 5 brothers, and there's David, Ed, George, Mose, and Gary, and they were young guys, and they all owned department stores in little towns like Lebanon and Bardstown and different New Haven. They each had little department stores, not your major Macy's or that
right.
in the city, but in the town square, a junior department store that had a little bit of everything. So think about it. Their livelihood was not interrupted by Prohibition in any way. So even though it was the depths of the Depression, people still needed a shirt, a hat, gloves, shoes, whatever. So they did okay, and they had enough money, and some members, and there was a couple members of the Beam family, Harry and Joe, that came to them with other investors and said, we want to go, we want to start distilling again. So they invested between $15,000 and $20,000. Every time Max tells the story, it's a different number. So I got to put a arrangement. Then they bought the land that we are today and the 200 acres there in Bardstown where the Heaven Hill Bourbon experience is. That's the William Heaven Hill Farm. And that's why we're called Heaven Hill. It was William Heaven Hill, which was one word. But when they sent off to Frankfurt for the license, they by mistake, somebody put a space between Heaven and Hill on the license. And when they sent it back, they went, shit, we just spent $15,000 on this. We want it right. And they said, well, we'll change it, but it's going to be a $25 refiling fee. So we're Heaven Hill Distillery to this day because of that. And not because they tried to save $25, which really was several $100 back then comparatively.
Sure.
But they knew they were going to make bottle and bond whiskey because that was the industry standard of the day. From 1897, when the Bottle and Bond Act was passed, so basically from 1901 till Prohibition, people knew bottle and bond. It took years to educate them, and we didn't have social media back then, but they took advertisements. Old Crow under the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897 and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, right? They put those in advertisements. So you got to know that was under U.S. government supervision, and it was the good stuff. Then all during Prohibition, the only legal whiskey you could buy was in a doctor's prescription. So people knew bottle and bond is the good stuff. So when you came out of it, so we made our first barrel December 13th, which was a Friday. So Friday the 13th is lucky for us.
Wow.
1935, we knew we weren't going to make our first bottle until 1939 and be bottled in bond. And that's when a gold label, old Heaven Hill bottled in bond came out. And so over those 4 years, the family kind of said, well, wait a minute, because they were going to always change the name of the company back to Heaven Hill, but they knew they could have waited till, 3 years and 364 days before they did it and paid the $25. But over that time, they kind of fell in love with the name. It sounds like a place, right? Heaven Hill.
Right.
If it's
Sure,
William Heaven Hill, that doesn't sound like a place, but Heaven Hill sounds like a place. It sounds like a heavenly place. Well, who the hell wouldn't want whiskey from Heaven Hill? So they went with it, and it quickly became, in his Max, our owner says, it was a level playing field for everybody. There was a handful of distilleries that did have just licenses to sell that stuff, but they still didn't have enough capacity on day one. So everybody kind of started from the same level playing field. And so Heaven Hill was a small little regional brand. And in Kentucky, Heaven Hill became the number one selling bourbon in the state of Kentucky. Over the years, even when whiskey sales went down in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and when vodka and tequila really start becoming the monster that it was and is, tequila just recently overtook vodka as the number one selling spirit in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, and the margarita is still the number one selling cocktail in the world. So when the times went bad, remember, our family still owns department stores. This is a side hustle. So this is Max's dad, Ed, like driving Lyft or Uber, right? This is a side hustle for that. So we became the buyers of brands. So think of how genius this is. I don't think this was in their business plan at all. But we are making whiskey. We make Heaven Hill. In 1955 or 57, we come out with Evan Williams. Okay? There was a celebration of Evan Williams in Louisville, and they said that'd be cool to create that brand, so they did. Those are the only two brands, really, of whiskey. Then, when distilleries started going out of business or selling, Ed and Max, they started buying those little brands like JTS Brown and JW Dant and Rittenhouse Rye and Pikesville Rye and Elijah Craig. And know what's really cool? When you buy brands, you want to buy the brands that have barrel inventory. Mm-hmm. So these brands all have barrel inventory for as long as they've been making whiskey. So you buy all of that. So you don't have to make that whiskey on day one. You've got the whiskey for years from now. And so you might have whiskey like JW Dant or Fighting Cock that sells well in South Carolina and a couple, because you got the Gamecocks down there. Mm-hmm. You got that and a couple of them, but it doesn't sell well anywhere else. That's okay. You got Virgin Bourbon that sells really big in North Carolina and in Kansas, but nowhere else. That's okay. It's just, it goes all to the bottom line, and they didn't have to make it. Then over time, you can decide how much whiskey you got to make to feed all those brands, and which ones you're going to push and which ones you're going to keep and which ones you're just going to whatever. What a cool way, right? And then you don't change the label ever, because that's spending money on them, right? You use the fan base that it had, and then you build your other brands, which have become, well, the flagship brand was Heaven Hill, but the national brand became Evan Williams because it had a little more age on it than Heaven Hill did. And for whatever reason, it was named after a person maybe. And, Jack Daniels was doing well. Jim Beam was doing well. Johnny Walker was doing well. Who knows? But anyway, brands are like children. You just never know which ones are going to be successful on their own and which ones are going to need help their whole life, right? So it just becomes clear what to do. And that's why we have a really weird mishmash, complicated, confusing portfolio, but a historically wonderful book to sell. And why it's not everywhere, but you got to make these decisions. And we're still family owned and operated by Max Shapira, the second generation, Ed's son, one of the original owners. Right. And his daughter, Kate, is the chief marketing officer. Her husband's Alan Latz is the chief operating officer. and their son Andy, still owners of the company. They run the company. I can't even imagine how much they've been offered to sell the company. But Max says we're staunchly family owned and family operated. So he's been president of the company since 1971. And
Wow.
still there. He's 78 years old and just sharp as two knives and just goes to work 6 days a week. And will tell you he's never worked a day in his life, although I know that's not true. But, there's been, with the fire and everything, just think of the things we've gone through that should have put this company out of business. And we still go toe to toe against the world's largest spirits company based in London, England. We go toe to toe with the world's largest bourbon company based in Chicago and Japan. We go toe to toe right against the world's largest American whiskey company right down the street that owns Jack Daniels and has 20 million cases that sells around the country. We go toe to toe because we're our house style. I've summed up into 2 words: longer, stronger.
Nice.
Because we're not owned by Wall Street and stockholders, we're not pushed to bring a product out. And you got to wait a long time in whiskey. You got to wait at least 4 years to have a nice tasting, initial offering. So Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, they're all 4 years old. Crown Royal's 3, right? Those are huge brands. We age ours for 5 years. We just wait a little bit longer, right? Because we can.
Yeah.
Right? So we age our whiskeys typically across the board longer than our main competitors. That's how we go toe to toe against these giants. And we're big too. I'm not saying we're not big. I just, the way we look at it. Then we've got extra flavor because we've aged it longer, right? Well, what if you put less water in that bottle and keep a lot of that flavor that you've aged for? So our main brand, Evan Williams Black Label, comes out at 86 proof, not 80. So less water has been added to it. And we quickly go to 90, 94, 100 and higher real quick.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so when you think of Heaven Hill, just think longer, stronger. And then if you're a consumer, because we don't advertise and have to buy as many napkin caddies and T-shirts and billboards and magazine ads, it's a better value to our customers. And if you're a on-premise bar or restaurant, you have more profit. So that's how you think of Heaven Hill in 2 or 3 words: is longer, stronger, more profit, longer, stronger, better value.
It's funny, Bernie, because one of my questions I was going to ask you is, working for a privately owned company that's family owned, what's the difference? But I don't have to ask that question because you just spent a few minutes answering exactly what I wanted to hear. So that's just really cool that working for a family owned company, that Heaven Hill has been as successful as it has been under the Shapiro family with Max. And I had the opportunity to meet Max last year randomly. I was at the Stave having lunch, and he just happened to be out there with a bunch of people with the Kentucky Distillers Association.
Yeah.
So I took the opportunity to go over and introduce myself, and he was like, "Who are you?" but it was nice to get the opportunity to meet him. But that's great, and I appreciate you sharing that information, because it means a lot to understand what working for a family-owned company means.
Yeah. I worked at Jim Beam, and they're a phenomenal company with phenomenal brands. I didn't leave because I was unhappy. I left because I got approached and I had a good opportunity here. But we're getting big too. So we're having growing pains internally too, of just, getting to be a bigger company and kind of losing some of that. But, Max, we have a fax machine at our worldwide headquarters in St. Matthews here. And it's in the supplies room where the coffee is, and it's this fax machine. And I asked my boss, I was like, "What the hell is that? And what's the fax machine doing here?" And he says, "Well, that's for Laird's." And I went, "Laird's, like apple brandy?" He goes, "Yeah." And that's, they make a bottle and bond apple brandy, which is really cool. It's the country's oldest distillery, continuously operating distillery up from New Jersey, Laird's. And I said, "What do you mean it's for Laird's?" He goes, "Well, Larry Laird, he buys, family owned, he buys barrels from us to age his brandy in." I said, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Well, Larry's like in his 80s. He goes, he doesn't have email, so he just faxes us." right? So now that's a family-owned company, right? We got a fax machine for one guy.
That's pretty awesome. No, that's great. So Matt, let's jump back over here to this Rittenhouse and talk about what you pick up in terms of the palate and the finish on it.
On the palate, I get a nice sweet grassiness, like a sweet lemongrass. I think there's a little citrus coming across from some of the rye on there as well. Then good corn, nice graham cracker and some sweetness and like a little bit of punch, a little bit of kick coming through with it. And the finish has got the rye spice that I'm looking for, a little bit of mint, something a little herbal, but nice peppercorn, maybe a touch of cinnamon, but a little bit more peppercorn than cinnamon on it. But good, well-rounded, another beautiful offering.
Yeah. And this one again, Bernie, this is probably in the $15 to $20 range? Or
no, this one's a little more. This one's about 25 to 30 because it is a lot harder to find. It's easy. It's not that hard to find right now. For about a 5-6 year period, we had a hard time keeping it in supply. But we're in a great spot right now. But there was, and then we had. It got further distributed because it got so popular in the cocktail world. So this one's about $25 to $30.
Okay.
So but it's still a great value.
I was gonna say,
it's around the same price as Bullet Rye. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great price and it's a great taste, Matt. I agree with you on the palate. It's got a lot. I get a lot of the sweetness that comes through. And to me, because there is a higher corn content, again, it comes through. I go back to the Frosted Flakes, and that's just in my mind because I do get that corn. It comes through with that sweetness, but the rye spiciness comes through a lot more than what we get picked up on the Evan Williams. So it's just a really nice. I don't want to say easy. I hate to say easy drinker, but man, goodness gracious, this is something that would be pretty crushable. I mean, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, it's a good standby. It's great to have on its own and not feel like you're breaking out the expensive China to drink. But it also stands really well in a cocktail. It's got enough character and enough proof on it to really hold its own and to bring some backbone in there as well. It's a great bottle that you can bring somewhere to share with friends. But at the same time, if you have your husband or wife's coworkers over and they are curious about rye and you want to serve them something that you don't mind them getting into a little bit heavy, it's not one that you're gonna be super regretful over sharing because at the availability and the price, it's a great offering. It's just a well-rounded kind of a jack of all trades rye.
I agree, Matt. You just keep talking because I just went back and poured up another round of Mellow Corn.
You did.
So after these three, can you now see why I like tasting these three together?
Oh yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. And it was funny, Bernie, because earlier I was like, "What order are we going to do this in?" And I'm like, "Well, corn whiskey, it makes sense to start there and then go to the bourbon because you can get that distinction between those two, and then to move to the rye." So.
And all 4 years old, all three of them are 4 years old. All three of them have the same three ingredients, but the used barrel, the brand new charred barrel, bring that story to life. Almost the same recipe with those two types of barrels, that story comes to life. Then you've got the same 3 grains, same brand new barrel, but different recipes in a higher rye content in the rye. Just brings all that to life in those 3 tastings. It is an incredible tasting. And three whiskeys, I think everybody should have every bottle and bond on their bar. First of all, people want to know where should I start of a collection? Just buy every bottle and bond from every distillery. That's a great start, and then you can branch out from there.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great advice because you're talking about 4-year-old whiskey, at least 4 years old, 100 proof, which isn't going to be too hot. It's not going to blow you out of the water. It's going to give you a good flavor profile for most of them. What do you guys barrel at, Bert? You guys go in at 125?
125.
Okay, 125. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. So, but yeah, no, I agree. I think that's great advice for people that are starting out, just to look for those bottled in bonds, and you can find some great values like what we talked about tonight. that are really going to be solid drinks to have on your bar, and to share with friends. Like Matt said, bring people over, introduce them to some things. Matt, we're gonna have to blind some people with this Mellow Corn. I'm just telling you, man, because they are not going to know that it is straight corn whiskey. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, all right. So, Bernie, let's talk about you. Heaven Hill has gone through some expansion. You guys have made some changes down there, which is, I mean, if you've been to the distillery, if you're fortunate enough to be in Kentucky or have gone by, it's pretty amazing the things that have gone on. But it's part of a $125 million expansion. Can you kind of talk about what has gone on over the last couple of years and where you guys are headed as a distillery and a brand?
Sure. When I started in 2012, they put more fermenters and more stills in. So at our Bernheim facility, which is at 17th and Breckenridge in downtown Louisville, right next to the Brown-Forman campus down there, it's actually in the California neighborhood. And because in the 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, that was 3 miles from downtown, west of town. They said it's so far west, you might as well be in California. So the California neighborhood, that's where most of your distilleries were. And we've been through a major distillery. So with Connor coming over, we were making 1,200 barrels a day. Connor did a practice where we're saving hundreds of thousands of gallons of water a month and thickened the beer, just put more grains in each fermenter. So we went from 1,200 barrels a day to 1,500 barrels a day just by that practice, which has been awesome. Wow. So it is now the world's largest single site bourbon distillery in the world. I know that Buffalo Trace is going to pass that, soon, and there's other distilleries. There's a lot of caveats with that, but it's one of the biggest ones in bourbon producers. We can make 400 to 450,000 barrels of whiskey at that facility. We just announced a $135 million family investment. When I think about this is Max and his family's money. Wow. They could take that $135 million and go to the south of France or wherever and say, goodbye Kentucky and whatever. But they're investing in the future of this industry and the future of Bardstown and the future of the bourbon industry in Kentucky and all over, and putting their money where their mouth is. So $135 million, and they're deciding whether they're going to build one still or two at the beginning. And so we still haven't decided that. But anyway, we're going to have mirror what's at Bernheim, and there's going to be, each still will be able to make 150,000 barrels a year. So wow. The plan is, at the end of when Phoenix, and we call it Project Phoenix. Well, that's not the name of the distillery. That's the name of the project, because we've risen from the ashes, because we were literally burned down in 1996. So this is Phoenix, right? And it's right in Bardstown. And so it's Bloomfield Road. It is right there in Bardstown. So we're excited we're bringing Heaven Hill Distilling back to Bardstown, where it started. And we will have over 900,000 barrels a year when we get up rocking and rolling. And we probably still don't think that's enough.
Wow. That's crazy. And, for people that don't know the story or understand, I mean, Bardstown was where Heaven Hill was founded. It's where you're from. There's a huge fire, 96, burned down the distillery. After that, you guys went to Louisville, right?
Yes, that was 1996. Lost 90,000 barrels, 7 rick houses, and the distillery should have put us out of business. But then the industry rallied around, called Max up, called Parker Beam up, said, "How can we help? We'll sell you time on our still. You can make it." So at when Conor O'Driscoll started in 2004 at the Brown-Forman Distillery in downtown Louisville, 70% of their production was for Heaven Hill.
Wow, I mean that's just awesome. I love that story. I love the story of how the bourbon industry rallies around each other. I mean, everybody's technically competitors, but at a grand level, everybody's on the same page. And Matt, what's your favorite quote?
Yeah, rising tide raises all ships, right?
Yep.
That's right.
There you go.
If Pepsi-Cola had a fire, Coca-Cola would probably not call up and ask if they could help, right?
Yeah, I agree.
No, they'd take them to the cleaners.
Yeah, but the bourbon industry does, because a lot of people in Kentucky, they have relatives that work at other distilleries. So
sure,
what affects me affects everybody. So it's a great thing. And then still being family owned and family operated at this size of company that we do more than whiskey, which is why we're here. Most people that made just American whiskey, like Pappy Van Winkle at Stitzel-Weller, they went out of business. But Max had diversified into vodkas and rums and gins and cordials and brandies. We have Christian Brothers Brandy, one of the top brandy brands in the world, in the United States. So we've diversified. We're in good financial shape. Obviously, we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars. We just we purchased Black Velvet Canadian whiskey a few years ago, Deep Eddy vodka out of Texas several years ago. We just acquired Samsung and Surrey, which is Fuse Spirits and Widow Jane and Blue Coat Gin and Yocho Tequila, things like that. So we are now really becoming the player that I can't imagine what Max's dad and 4 uncles would. They've got to be looking down and smiling, because it's been an incredible thing that Max has been able to do, along with Kate and Alan and Andy and all the employees. It's just been really fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible what you guys have, what they've done, what you guys have done as a brand. And I have to admit, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is my favorite bourbon. Any expression of it. I probably have 350 to 400 bottles of bourbon here in my basement, but I would say probably 40 or more of those bottles, Matt, wouldn't you agree, are probably some form of Elijah Craig
on the conservative side?
Yeah. So, yeah, a huge fan for sure. So,
thank you.
Before we wrap it up here, Bernie, anything you want to add before we get out of here?
No, I appreciate y'all having me on and let me talk about my favorite subject, which is bottle and bond. We really didn't get and touched on what bottle and bond is. Maybe we can talk about that another time, and really what
we'll do it another time. Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm glad you got to taste these 3 expressions. It's one of my favorite flights to do. So if you're ever at a bar and you have these 3 different whiskeys, these are something you can taste on your own. They're not that expensive, so you can do a flight of them for a reasonable price. You can buy the 3 bottles for $50. You can have all 3 bottles and have and enjoy these flights with your friends, and bring to life, after you taste them, what the difference between an American corn whiskey, a Kentucky and American corn whiskey is, and how that's different than a bourbon, and then how that is different than a rye whiskey, where you might not be able to just articulate that right off the top of your head. Now that you've experienced it, you can do it, even as a novice. I mean, you don't have to be, an expert palate to find these differences in these whiskeys, which and so appreciate the chance to shine a light on our brands and our company, and appreciate y'all having me on.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Matt, anything you want to add before we wrap it up, man?
Hey, Bernie, it's been a great time. It's a great story and an even better storyteller. So thanks for walking us through everything, for shining some light on your past, your present, and hopefully where you're going with the future, not just in your own personal career with Heaven Hill, but what we've got to expect in our glasses and everything coming forward. And it really has been fun. This has been a fun trip down Bottled and Bond Lane here, and we've really shown some great expressions. And I think that the passion that you all and your team are putting into this, and the way you're selling it, and your knowledge behind it, really shows.
Thanks a lot. Well, visit us in Bardstown at the Heaven Hill Bourbon Experience, in Louisville at the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience, heavenhilldistillery.com. I'm at whiskeyprof.com, like whiskey professor, whiskeyprof.com. And next time I come to Lexington, we'll get together for a drink.
Yeah, Bernie, that would be great. And I'm glad you said it. I was going to ask you before we wrapped it up, where can people find you and find Heaven Hill? But you've obviously shared that. But yes, you have your own website, the Whiskey Prof, for the Whiskey Professor, which is really cool.
And if you want a good book, I wrote my book, Bourbon Whiskey, Our Native Spirits, Sour Mash and Sweet Adventures. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it at our visitor centers. There's signed copies there. Mm-hmm.
You're in your 3rd edition on that, is that right?
Actually, yes. And actually, the pub, I stopped by my publisher in Indianapolis. They're a small little Blue River Press. It's an awesome company to work with. They were the first and only publisher I approached to, and so I'm 1 for 1. That story never gets told,
Nice. Yeah, most writers don't get that.
We all hit it off, and they said, my publisher said, "Do you want to do a 4th?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'd love to." So I have a great chapter of a real nerdy, geeky deep dive on house styles between all the distilleries, which I think is going to be a game changer and an incredible chapter for that I'm excited about, and hopefully everybody else will be excited about.
Well, that's very cool. Bernie, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've had a great time. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm telling you what, I am now part of the Mellow Corn cult.
You're in the army.
Yeah, big fan now. This is I'm glad I was introduced to this. So thanks for those suggestions. We will definitely have to do this again sometime soon. Appreciate that. Appreciate everything that you guys are doing at Heaven Hill and the Shapiro family, everything that they put out down there. We're big fans. There's no question about it. You know, when you think about Kentucky bourbon, I mean, Heaven Hill obviously comes to mind as one of the biggest and one of the best. So as a native Kentuckian, I'm just, it's always nice to be able to just feel a sense of pride about what's being done here in our state.
Yeah.
And you guys are definitely part of that. So really appreciate that. We do want to thank all our sponsors. We appreciate everything that they do for us. We want to thank all of our listeners. Thank you guys for all of the support. If you have any questions, please feel free to message us on Instagram or Facebook, or you can email us at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you guys. If you feel inclined to do so, please leave us a review of the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. And with that said, I'm going to wrap it up and send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.
Whether it's rye, sour mash Tennessee whiskey, or bourbon, Davidson Reserve has something delicious to offer any whiskey lover's palate. Pick up a bottle of one of our award-winning Davidson Reserve whiskeys from your local retailer today. Visit www.davidsonreserve.com for more information. And cheers to drinking local.